Mark Dimondstein is president of the American Postal Workers Union and has held that position since 2013. He was a longtime president of the Greater Greensboro, North Carolina local and a national field organizer for the union from 2000 to 2010. His union was an early, high-profile supporter of the Sanders for President campaign and may be a key reason the Vermont Senator has emerged as a major 2020 political force and possible Democratic Party nominee. It's great to see you again. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the invitation. I don't think I'd give us that much credit for the issues that have created the Bernie Sanders campaign, but we'll take a look. Listen, so I'm sure I bring a little different perspective to this meeting today than most of the speakers. I'm honored to represent 200,000 postal workers. There are 4 postal unions. Together we represent about 500,000 hardworking public servants and extremely dedicated to the mission of binding the country together through the public postal service. It's not an accident that the Postal Service consistently is the most trusted government agency, and that's really based, a lot of it is based on the trust, the accountability, the skill, and the dedication of its workers. So I know the general topic today is postal reform. So they got me thinking about what reform is. So I went to the dictionary. And one definition is, seems to be the main one, is to make changes in something, typically a social, political, or economic institution, in order to improve it. In order to improve it. So, our view would be that anything that diminishes and cuts service, that anything that undermines the democratic right of the people to postal services, the public policy of the USO that guarantees mail service 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week. I was joking with some people at our building today. For those of us who are old enough to have followed the Beatles, we'll even take 8 days a week. Anything that slows down the mail in a time of e-commerce where people expect quicker and quicker service, that limits what the United States Postal Service can do, such as the Sonicon views, that we should not be allowed to be in the package industry, anything that undermines the low-cost anchor that the public post office provides in this massive industry for all customers, from the single customer to the largest mailers, and anything that calls for the privatization that would raise costs for all the rest of us, but enrich a few companies. And anything that does away with the collective bargaining rights of the workers, as is recommended in the Presidential Task Force report of December 2018, we think is not reform at all. In fact, if you go back to the dictionary, the antonym, see, I got fancy this morning, or the opposite of reform is defined as to subvert or to degrade. And so for us, the question of reform is to make sure we don't subvert and degrade. So our vision of reform, to make changes and improve, is maybe very different. And we're not enthralled with those who are, with some of the European models that, you know, more to privatization, more to reducing service, raising costs, and all those other things that came along with it. So our reform would look like this. And we're not the only ones raising this. Expanded services. Very much focused on the opportunity to expand into financial services, where banks are pulling out of almost every neighborhood from urban to rural, where millions and millions of hard-working Americans get caught in a predatory payday lending, check cashing industry, and don't have access to traditional banking services. Where that, by the way, we could look to the world model, where it's done all over the world, as well as to our own model here for decades and decades. Things like vote by mail, which get to some of our democratic rights as a people that the Postal Service can further bind the nation together. The opportunities to coordinate with federal and state agencies. I remember speaking to Congressman Chaffetz when he was the head of the Oversight Committee and still a congressman, when in the bill that he was promoting at the time, it raised more of a partnership with state services. And he pointed out to us, and I think I got the number right, he said he has small towns in Utah that people had to drive 120 miles to get to the state agency when there was a post office down the block in that town. Licensing, we love the idea of charging stations for electric cars in front of post offices. All things that also can bring in money. The question of store-to-door opportunity, where many retailers are using their footprint in a changing world of e-commerce. Rather than going to the fulfillment center model, changing to the store model where the orders come into the store and can be delivered in a radius either that day or the next day. Nothing, no entity is better situated than the Public Postal Service with our wonderful infrastructure to be able to do that. Question of checking on seniors, health checks, road checks, and so on. And I have to point out, this should be a moment in our country, because we've always believed, and I know I've talked to the PMG about this, and I know that she feels the same way, I think. If not, she'll jump up and say no. Often the first, don't jump up yet, I haven't said it. Often what brings normalcy back after natural disaster is often and most often the public postal service. So now you think about a pandemic in this country, or a potential pandemic. Think about that in terms of what happens if the post office is broken up and privatized, and whether those kind of services and that ability to bind the people of this country together are lost in that process. And I always like to remind myself and others, it's not called the United States Postal Business. It's not the USPB. It's the USPS, the United States Postal Service. And again, not just the coronavirus, but this tragedy in Tennessee. It's going to be the postal work, the letter carriers going out. After some of these fires in California a year or two ago, there were pictures of destroyed communities and letter carriers delivering to those mailboxes, helping to bring normalcy back to the people that had suffered those kind of things. So, and then for us looking forward would be to deal with the pre-funding of the retiree health benefit mandate. And most of you in this room know, we're at least in a building on Capitol Hill, that HR 2382 passed the House with a vast bipartisan vote of 309 to 106. And now the same bill is in the Senate, 2965. We would submit that before, when we talk about what we would call the opposite of reform, to degrade and diminish, that we fix those kind of shackles on the Postal Service. And I know in the invitation it talked about $8.8 billion of losses. But so much of that goes back to this 2006 pre-funding mandate that I have really yet to meet somebody in Capitol Hill that says that was right, that was fair, or it makes any sense anymore. So we would advocate that that be a core part of reform. Now, we are the first to admit that that one piece of repeal doesn't fix all the challenges that the post office faces. And we're very clear as the unions, and this I can speak for all the unions, that along with the repeal, at some point we have to deal with deeper postal legislation. But it would be a big step forward to take the pressure of the post office and say, hey, post office is going to pay as they go, as they always have, on retiree health benefits, and should be able to going into the future. And no other company, no other entity has to do this. And there's no question that that burden has kept the post office from being able to innovate enough, being able to get a new fleet enough, have to provide the post office of capital, and so on and so forth. So before we start talking about, you know, the Norway model and this thing, and let's have less delivery, and my sister in the dirt road in Vermont, maybe she'll get none at all because it'll just be too expensive. Let's fix the things that we can fix. We think Congress created a lot of problems, maybe not on purpose, maybe a lot of people in Congress now weren't here then. But there's an opportunity to fix it, and we can start with the big fix, at least part of the big fix, of passing both of those bills, getting it onto the president's desk, and getting it signed. So we have a pretty simplistic view of the USO, since that was one of the main titles. It's good. We want it. People of this country need it. And think about the right of the people, no matter who we are, where we live, how old we are, how young we are, what nationality, what gender, rural, urban, suburban, and everywhere in between, have access to that same service. And anything that messes with that, we're opposed to. And with that, I'll just say that it's, again, thank you for the invitation today.
Happy to have you here.
Sometimes I never know after I get done whether I'm going to be invited back. Listen, in our union, in the postal unions, the officers are postal workers. That's where we all came from. That's where we are. And we know we speak for all postal workers, that we're proud of what we do, and that we believe in the changing world. The telegraph came in one day and that changed postal services. And the telephone came in one day and that changed postal service. And the internet came in one day and that changed postal service. But what hasn't changed is the need for this national treasure enshrined in the Constitution. As mail changes, that need does not change. To communicate, to individually, commerce, and the whole thing. And we would submit in a day of e-commerce that if e-commerce is going to work for everyone, from the customer to the small business person to the large business person, we need to make sure that this national treasure remains vibrant for generations to come, and we're proud to be part of that movement and motion going forward. Thank you all.